You think you know everything about royal scandals, but what I'm about to tell you will absolutely shock you to your core. Centuries in the past, the birth of a royal child could decide the fate of an entire kingdom. From infancy, heirs were prepared for power, trained in combat, schooled in diplomacy, and molded for leadership. But what happened when a child of royal blood was born? Different. What if that child had difficulty speaking, struggled to walk, or found it hard to understand the world around them? To ruling monarchs, such differences weren't simply personal heartbreaks. They were threats to the throne. A child who didn't meet expectations was often considered a shameful secret. Across the pages of history, numerous royal children with disabilities were erased from public life, shut away in distant institutions, kept hidden within palace walls, or falsely listed as deceased while still breathing. Why? Because their presence disrupted the carefully crafted illusion of royal flawlessness. Monarchies thrived on the image of strength, perfection, and divine favor, qualities that disabilities in their minds shattered. Among those hidden stories lies the painful truth about royal children born with Down syndrome, a condition caused by a genetic difference, yet once misunderstood, feared, and cloaked in silence. Now you might be thinking, surely they would have loved and cared for these children regardless, right? Wrong. What actually happened is so much worse than you can imagine. These children were systematically hidden away, locked in institutions, shipped off to remote locations, and in many cases officially declared dead while they were still very much alive. Their existence was scrubbed from official records, their photographs were destroyed, and their families pretended they never existed at all. We're talking about children who should have lived lives of unimaginable luxury and privilege, instead being condemned to lives of isolation, neglect, and absolute invisibility. The most shocking part? This wasn't just happening in medieval times. This was happening well into the 20th century, during an era when we like to think humanity had evolved beyond such cruelty. These weren't ancient barbaric practices. These were calculated, deliberate decisions made by some of the most powerful families in the modern world. Let me tell you about Down syndrome first, because understanding this condition is crucial to grasping just how absolutely heartless these royal families were. Down syndrome is a genetic condition where a person is born with an extra copy of chromosome 21. Instead of the typical 46 chromosomes, they have 47. This causes certain physical characteristics like almond-shaped eyes, a flatter facial profile, and often comes with some degree of intellectual disability. Many people with Down syndrome also face health challenges like heart defects or thyroid conditions, and they typically develop at a different pace than other children. But here's what's absolutely crucial to understand. People with Down syndrome can live full, meaningful, happy lives when given proper support, education, and love. In today's world, we see people with Down syndrome becoming teachers, actors, business owners, and contributing members of society in countless ways. They form relationships, pursue their passions, and bring joy to everyone around them. The condition doesn't make someone less human, less deserving of love, or less valuable as a person. However, in the past, especially in royal circles, Down syndrome and other disabilities were viewed through a lens of complete ignorance and superstition. These families believed that disabilities were punishments from God, signs of weak bloodlines, or evidence of moral failing. They thought that having a disabled child meant their family was cursed, or that their claim to divine rule was somehow illegitimate. The very idea that their supposedly perfect, God-chosen bloodline could produce a child who was different was absolutely unthinkable to them. Royal families were obsessed with projecting an image of strength, perfection, and divine favor. Every public appearance, every portrait, every official announcement was carefully crafted to maintain this illusion of superiority. A disabled child didn't just complicate this narrative, it completely shattered it. So rather than challenge their prejudices or show compassion, these families chose the most cowardly path imaginable. They simply pretended these children didn't exist. Now let me tell you about one of the most heartbreaking and shocking cases that perfectly illustrates this royal cruelty, the absolutely devastating story of the Bowes-Lyon sisters. This case is so horrific that when it finally came to light, it sent shockwaves through the British establishment and exposed the dark underbelly of royal secrecy. Nerissa Bowes-Lyon was born in 1919, and her sister Catherine followed in 1926. These weren't distant relatives of the royal family, they were first cousins of Queen Elizabeth II herself. Their mother was the sister of the Queen Mother, making them incredibly close to the very heart of the British royal family. Both girls were born with severe intellectual disabilities, and many historians believe they likely had Down syndrome, though the exact diagnosis was never officially confirmed because, as you'll see, no one in the family cared enough to provide them with proper medical attention. What happened to these two innocent girls is absolutely unforgivable. Instead of being raised in the luxury and comfort that should have been their birthright, instead of receiving the medical care and educational support they needed, they were shipped off to the Royal Earlswood Hospital in Surrey when they were still children. This wasn't a prestigious medical facility. It was essentially a dumping ground for people with mental disabilities, a place where inconvenient family members could be hidden away and forgotten. But here's where this story gets even more shocking. The royal family didn't just institutionalize these girls, they literally erased them from existence. In official royal records, in genealogical documents, in family trees published in reference books, Nerissa and Catherine were listed as having died in childhood. The family told the world that these girls were dead, while they were actually very much alive, languishing in an institution, receiving virtually no visits from their wealthy, powerful relatives. Can you imagine the absolute cruelty of this? These were children who should have been surrounded by love, care, and the best medical attention money could buy. Instead, they were abandoned in an overcrowded institution, forgotten by everyone who should have protected them, and officially declared dead by their own family. They spent decades in this place, watching other patients come and go, while their own relatives lived lives of unimaginable privilege just a few hours away. Nerissa died in 1986, having spent virtually her entire life in this institution. Catherine lived even longer, dying in 2014 at the age of 87, still in the same facility where she'd been dumped as a child. That means Catherine lived through the entire reign of her cousin, Queen Elizabeth, through royal weddings, jubilees, and celebrations, while remaining completely invisible and forgotten. The most heartbreaking detail? Throughout their decades in this institution, these sisters received almost no visits from their family. Occasionally, a distant relative might stop by, but for the most part, they were completely abandoned by the people who should have loved and supported them. While their cousins were living in palaces, attending state dinners, and enjoying lives of luxury, Nerissa and Catherine were sharing cramped rooms with other forgotten patients, eating institutional food, and being treated like they were already dead. This horrific secret only came to light in the 1980s, when investigative journalists started digging into the records of mental health institutions. When the story broke, the public was absolutely outraged. Here was the royal family, who presented themselves as paragons of virtue and family values, exposed as having essentially thrown away two vulnerable family members like they were garbage. The scandal rocked the establishment and revealed just how far these families would go to maintain their precious image of perfection. But the Bowes-Lyon sisters weren't an isolated case. This kind of systematic cruelty was happening across royal families throughout Europe. Let me tell you about Princess Alexandrine of Prussia, whose story shows a slightly different but equally telling approach to dealing with disabled royal children. Princess Alexandrine was born in 1915, the daughter of Crown Prince Wilhelm of Prussia. She was diagnosed with Down syndrome, and her case reveals how even the supposedly more compassionate royal families still prioritized secrecy and shame over their children's well-being. Unlike the Bowes-Lyon sisters, Alexandrine wasn't immediately shipped off to an institution. She remained with her family throughout her life. On the surface, this might seem like a more loving approach, and in some ways, it was. Alexandrine appeared occasionally in family photographs, and even on some postcards, suggesting that her family didn't completely hide her existence. She attended a special school and lived what appears to have been a relatively comfortable life within the family circle. But here's the crucial point. While Alexandrine was allowed to exist within the family, she was completely excluded from any public royal duties or official recognition. She lived a quiet, private life, shielded from public scrutiny, and kept away from any situation where her condition might reflect poorly on the royal family's image. The message was clear. Disabilities could be tolerated and even loved within the private family sphere, but they could never, ever be publicly displayed or acknowledged. Alexandrine died in 1980, after living what was, by the standards of disabled royal children, a relatively privileged life. But even her more compassionate treatment highlights the fundamental problem. These families still viewed disability as something shameful that needed to be hidden from the world. Now, let me tell you about a case that shows how even non-royal but politically prominent families dealt with these same prejudices. The story of Anne de Gaulle, daughter of the future French president Charles de Gaulle. This case is particularly fascinating because it reveals how even families outside traditional monarchy struggled with the same issues of image and public perception. Anne de Gaulle was born in 1928 with Down syndrome, and her story provides a glimpse into what compassionate treatment could look like, even within the constraints of social prejudice. Unlike many of her royal counterparts, Anne was raised at home by her parents and was never institutionalized. She formed an incredibly close bond with her father, who reportedly adored her and spent considerable time with her despite his demanding political responsibilities. Charles de Gaulle, who would later become one of France's most significant political figures, showed genuine love and devotion to his daughter. He would take time from his busy schedule to play with her, read texts, owe her, and ensure she felt valued and loved. This stands in stark contrast to the royal families who simply abandoned their disabled children to institutions. However, even in this more compassionate situation, the social pressures of the time were evident. Anne was kept largely shielded from public view, and her condition was never openly discussed in political or media circles. The family clearly felt the need to protect both Anne and Charles de Gaulle's political image by maintaining privacy around her disability. Tragically, Anne died at the age of 20 from pneumonia, ending what had been a relatively happy but necessarily private life. Her mother was so moved by Anne's memory that she founded the foundation Anne de Gaulle Hospital in her honor, creating something positive from their personal tragedy.